Did you know there's a Canadian Standards Association that is putting together new standards for transit and rail? I'm Paul Comfort, and on this episode of Transit Unplugged, we tell you all about it in our conversation with Ana-Maria Tomlinson. She serves as the Director of Strategic and Cross-Sector Programs within the Standards Division at the CSA Group. In this capacity, she oversees the development and implementation of innovative standardization programs. And CSA's newest standards is their development sector in transit and passenger rail. So we talk about that today, how this whole process works. They're basically putting together an entire program with 4 different focus areas over the next 4 years by collecting intel from the rail industry and rail leaders, putting them together in these standards, which they hope will be voluntarily subscribed to by transit agencies when they send out contracts, but also may even be codified through regulation. This is a fascinating conversation and a topic area we haven't really covered before here on Transit Unplugged. I recently saw Ana-Maria in person at the CUTA conference, the Canadian Urban Transit Association conference in Montreal. We talked about getting her on the podcast to share about this new standards program that they're putting together in Canada. Enjoy this conversation. Great to be with Ana-Maria Tomlinson on our podcast today. Anna, you and I had a chance to speak briefly at the recent CUTA conference in Montreal. Great to see you again.
Great to see you again as well, Paul. And yeah, I really enjoyed the session that you had at CUTA with the session with the CEOs. Really entertaining and very interesting. So looking forward to the podcast.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's what I aim for. Infotainment.
That's right.
It'd be enough information to be useful, but enough entertainment to have you listen to the whole thing. So that's what we try to do here on the podcast too. So while we were there, and Marco, the CEO of CUTA, has also told me about the importance of the role your organization plays in Canada. Tell us about CSA Group and what that is.
Yeah. CSA Group is a standards development organization. So we're a national standards organization here in Canada. We also develop standards in the United States. But the organization actually has 2 parts. One looks after certification, inspection, and testing. So that would be your safety boots. You might see a CSA mark certification on there, or hockey helmets. That's where we get a lot of folks recognizing our work. But that's the side of the organization that is quite separate from, the organization that I represent, which is standards development. So within the standards organization, we look after the development of over 3,000 standards and codes across multiple subject areas, whether that's electrical systems, construction, natural resources, occupational health and safety, nuclear standards, and the list is quite broad. We are Canada's oldest and largest standards organization, and we've been around for over 100 years. So that's a bit about our history, but interestingly enough, our very first standard that we published was for railway bridges, believe it or not.
That's cool.
So that's where we got our first publication. Yeah.
And that stands for, CSA stands for?
Canadian Standards Association.
I wanted to get that out there because we hadn't said that yet. Great. So yeah, we have I've seen, builders associations here in America that do construction standards, and they're actually a lot of times adopted by the legislature as the standard. Do you all have that there in Canada too?
Exactly the same way. Yeah. So that works the same way here. The standards that we publish are all voluntary. So we are not a regulator. We're actually a not-for-profit, non-government organization. But the standards that we publish can be taken up into practice, whether it's by policymakers who wish to reference them directly in their policies, or regulators, or they can be used, voluntarily by organizations that are simply aiming to follow kind of a best practice, if you will.
That's great. All right. So tell us about the involvement you have in the public transportation world.
Yeah, so that's actually a new space for us. So my team was created about 2.5 years ago. CSA decided that based on our research into the sector, there was a substantial need for standards and standards development to support the industry, quite broadly speaking, right? And our focus is on, transit, so subways, buses, et cetera, but also passenger rail. And so some of the topics that we touch on within my team are, topics like climate resilience. So how can we make sure that organizations have tools at their disposal to reduce their risks and exposures due to a changing climate, whether that's flooding, whether that high heat or otherwise. We're also looking at accessibility. We're looking at safety management systems. So how can we help transit agencies across, the country implement consistent, comparable, and robust safety management systems? And then one of our newest areas of focus is this transit rail code that I've been trying to share as broadly as possible, something that we're quite proud of. And it's looking at that design and construction phase for transit and passenger rail projects. And we have a lot of them here in Canada. And I know that there are a lot in the United States as well, which is wonderful to see, great investment, but there's a need for resources to really support these very complex projects that we're seeing advanced.
Okay, well, dive into it. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, so when we're looking at the Canadian landscape, what we're seeing is that despite the investments that we're seeing in transit and passenger rail, and by the way, the latest numbers on this are approximately $250 billion are going into new projects here in Canada, whether it's light rail, whether it's subway extensions, whether it's high-speed rail. Despite those investments, Canada actually lacks a standards framework to really support the process that's used in design, in construction, to guide all of the activities that have to take place on these mega projects. And so when we were looking at other jurisdictions around the world, whether that's Europe, whether that's Australia, many other jurisdictions, they have not one or two, but they have hundreds, if not thousands of standards that are used actively across their projects. And that really helps streamline, and it adds a level of predictability, a level of consistency in how these projects are completed. And so that's where we saw, well, hold on a second. Why do we have this difference? Canada's completing these substantial projects, and we're seeing a lot of different types of issues come up. Can we provide some solutions here for the industry to make sure that public tax dollars are going as far as they should be going?
Okay, so where are you at now in the development of them, and what kind of standards are you looking at?
Yes. So what we're doing as a first step is we're working with a group of subject matter experts to really dive deeply into what the standards gaps are here in Canada, what is available internationally, and how can we leverage that here to the best extent possible. So it's really important when we're looking at a gap as substantial as this, design and construction for transit and passenger rail. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? A lot has been done in this space. There are excellent standards that already exist. The challenge is in their application, right? How do we make sure that the standards developed by the EU or, in Japan or American standards, right? We have ARIMA. How do we make sure that they're applied appropriately in Canada? And then how do we make sure that as you're using, let's say, one standard from one jurisdiction, one from another jurisdiction, how do you make sure they complement each other and that they really mesh well together and that you're not adding any challenges along the way, right? So it's a question of making sure that we know what are those standards that we can leverage quickly so we don't reinvent the wheel, but providing enough direction and guidance so that they're used appropriately in Canada. And then last but not least, looking at, okay, now that we're using what's available, what are those outstanding gaps? We really, want to focus in on, do we have standards for tunneling? Do we have standards for station design? Do we have standards for railway electrification? These are substantial gaps that we have right now where national standards will be needed and a new effort will be needed to really standardize those specific elements. So looking at the whole picture broadly, what our team has done is decided that the best course of action to move forward efficiently is to develop a national code for transit and passenger rail systems that will reference existing standards where they exist and then reference new national standards as they're developed and provide that kind of overarching framework, systems engineering approach for how all of these elements fit together.
Very good. And you mentioned ARIMA. Tell us what that is. That's an American standards group?
It is an American standards group, and ARIMA standards have traditionally been developed for the freight sector, so for heavy rail, for freight, and they are used in Canada as well, right? So they are used here, especially where we have shared corridors between passenger rail and freight. It's ARIMA standards that will typically dominate those spaces because freight is typically the heaviest user of those corridors, right? So that's where, there is that, let's say, preference for ARIMA standards. It's in those shared corridor spaces. However, there are challenges that arise as, say, you wish to use a standard that was intended for freight and apply it directly to a light rail system. You're going to have some challenges ahead of you. And so
of course,
that's
right.
where you need to, maybe leverage European standards, right, for some of those light rail systems.
Thanks for listening to the Transit Unplugged podcast. We are so glad you're here. If you're enjoying this show, we know you'll love our other transit industry programs. On Transit Unplugged TV, Paul Comfort explores the food, culture, and transit systems around the globe. You get to see everything. You'll love this show. And every week, we also offer up the Transit Unplugged News Minute, where you can get the latest industry headlines in less than 60 seconds. You can find out more at transitunplugged.com. Now back to Paul Comfort for this edition of the award-winning Transit Unplugged podcast.
Okay, so where are we now in all this development? Are you still in the information gathering phase, or you're putting out regs, or where are you at now? Where are you up to?
We're fairly advanced. So we have a number of activities underway. As I mentioned, we have this standard strategy working group, and they're developing what's essentially an extended table of contents. So the structure. What's the structure of this code, right? This will be probably one of the largest publications that CSA has had in many years as far as codes go. We have many others, the Canadian Highway Bridge Design Code, the electrical code. We're familiar with very large projects, but a lot of planning goes into, making sure that you have a robust structure up front, because once you start, it's very hard to change things from there. So we're building out the structure, the framework, the table of contents, and we're doing a standard scan to help arm our technical committees moving forward with information on what standards they should be working with as they're developing the code. We are looking at developing a 4-part code. So that would be part 1 would kind of be common requirements or general requirements that would apply to any type of project, whether that's light rail, whether that's subways, whether that's conventional rail or high speed. And then we would have 3 additional parts, each of which would target specific types of projects. So part 2 would be kind of urban transit. So that's your light rail systems, subway systems. Part 3 would be conventional passenger rail. And then part 4 would be dedicated to high-speed rail. So that structure is being developed. We're making good progress. And I think we're nearly there in terms of the prep work. Our plan is to start development in April 2026. So that's what we're working towards. That's what we're preparing our members for. And all of our engagement right now is focused on making sure that organizations across the country are aware of this effort, that they're coming on board, that they're bringing their knowledge, their expertise into this process to contribute to the standards development effort. In addition to that, we have some research that we're doing on looking at major transit projects that are completed across the country to determine where do challenges arise. What are those pain points? Whether it's fire safety, whether it's safety assurance, whether it's interface management between disciplines. We want to take a careful look at those areas that are causing the largest amount of grief and the most significant delays, the largest cost escalations, right? How can we address those effectively within this code?
It's very practical. Yeah, I like that, because
Yes.
people sometimes say it's regulations that drive up costs, those kind of things, but you have to have standards.
Exactly.
So I'm glad you're looking at that, the implementation. What would someone, if they're listening to this, Ana-Maria, let's say someone in Calgary is listening and they're like, oh, well, I want to have input into that. How would they have input?
So they would have to get in touch with us. And by the way, Calgary is fantastic. We have folks from Calgary already at the table. They might be
Awesome. I knew you
listening.
would have. That's why I use them as an example. But go ahead. Yes.
Yes. So they would have to get in touch with us. Right now, the opportunity for getting involved is at that strategic working group level that's developing
Okay.
the plan. But at the same time, we're building a long list of members that we would reach out to when we're at the stage of onboarding members for the technical committee. And we expect to onboard somewhere between 100 and 200 members for this project because it is so substantial, because there are so many areas of expertise that will be needed, whether that's civil works, whether that's electrical systems, communications and signaling. We need all those folks at the table. So for that reason, we're looking at a very large technical committee that we'll need to establish in the spring. So we encourage folks to reach out to us, reach out to me, reach out to my team directly. We're very happy to hear from you at this time. And we will make a note of your interest. And when our project managers are ready to begin that establishment of the technical committee, we'll be getting in touch with you and determining, okay, what's your background? What's your expertise that you're bringing to the table? And can we have that participation in the committee?
Is there a website or a resource that people can go to if they're listening to this?
Yes. So the CSA Group website is probably your best portal to get in touch with us. There is an email address, just transit@csagroup.org. Okay. So
Perfect.
you can reach out to that inbox as well, and someone will get back to you.
So a project this massive with so many kind of tentacles, if you want to use that word, into all these areas of disciplines, how long do you expect this to take? And when do you anticipate to have like a first draft or something?
So what we're looking at for the completion of the entire code, all 4 parts, we are estimating a timeline of about 4 years. And this is pretty ambitious as far as standards go. So when we're looking at, a new standard development project, that's typically, a timeline of 18 to 24 months. So in this case, what we'll do, because if you do the math, it doesn't add up, right? So what we're doing here is we're actually staggering. We're planning to stagger each of those parts. So we might start part 1 in April. Maybe by October, November, we're ready to start part 2. Or part 3 or part 4. So we'll have that staggered approach so that we're not overwhelming our committee members, but also having like a very steady pace to get through the content quickly. And there's a real motivation to publish this efficiently. So pretty quick, pretty ambitious timeline. And that's because we want it to be used. We have a lot of projects that are in the pipeline here in Canada. And the quicker we can publish this code, the quicker it'll be available to be used by transit agencies, by contractors, by consultants that are actively doing that important design work at the start of a project. So yes, 4 years is what we're looking at.
And what's the plan for implementation? In other words, you plan to keep it as a voluntary standard, or do you seek some type of government agency mandate for it, or what do you have in plan there?
Great question. And, as a standards organization, our aim is to do what we can to make sure that there's good uptake of our standards, because if they're not used, they are not driving the impact that we're looking to see. For something like this, and for all of our standards, when we're building out the technical committee, we aim to have participation from government bodies at the committee table. So whether that's federal, whether that's provincial, they're involved in the process just as much as anybody else. So we have a balanced technical committee that balances out representation from the different groups that have an interest in the project. Whether you're the owner, whether you're, the engineering group that's actively working on the project, whether you're a government body that might have, authority having jurisdiction over that project, and then whether you're academics or not-for-profits or other subject matter experts that should also be at the table. So we try to have everyone there, balanced representation. So we make sure that one group is not overpowering or significantly outnumbering the 2 smallest categories. So we have that method for reducing bias as much as possible in the content. What this does is it enables government bodies to be at the table and see exactly what's going into the standard or the code in this case. And it builds that comfort level with the content, with having an opportunity to contribute and have their perspectives taken into consideration, and then seeing directly the level of buy-in. Because the standards development process, that's where it really shines, is in the development and establishment of buy-in by so many different stakeholder groups through the development process. So at the end of the day, you have a document that people are very comfortable with. They've seen it, they participated in the process, their concerns were addressed, and now there's a document that they are all comfortable working with. So that makes it very easy for whether it's Transport Canada or MTO, Ministry of Transportation in Ontario, or other provincial groups to say, okay, we know that there's likely going to be not that much pushback on this particular requirement because everyone's had a chance to be involved. We know it's robust. We know, a lot of data has gone into informing the content, and so they feel comfortable referencing that. So yes, ultimately, it would be phenomenal to see this code referenced in regulation. It would also be phenomenal to see it referenced in contracts. So that's another kind of pathway for uptake, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if Metrolinx wants to build a new something like rail, they say to A&E firms and contractors, hey, we're referring to this CSA standard.
That's exactly right. And they do reference our standards regularly. So we know that interest is there, and we're looking forward to more of that.
Yeah, this is very interesting. We've never covered this topic on the podcast before, so I'm glad you all offered to come on and be part of it. Hey, let me ask you another follow-up question, not directly related to the standards that you're talking about, but in reference to overall, what's going on with high-speed rail in Canada? I just got back from a trip to Italy, and we filmed it for our episode of Transit Unplugged TV that's airing right now on YouTube, and I was so impressed with the high-speed rail in Italy. And, people here in America are always saying, man, what's taking so long? And Brightline's trying to do one between Los Angeles and Vegas. Tell us what's happening in Canada there, if you don't mind, Anna.
Yeah, so some really exciting work is underway here in Canada. And, there's one project that you or your listeners might have heard about, which is the Alto High-Speed Rail Project. This is, a project that's been talked about for many years, but now it's really becoming a reality. And it's planned to be a high-speed rail network connecting Toronto to Quebec City with stops in Peterborough, Ottawa, Montreal, Laval, and Trois-Rivières. And it really would be a full high-speed rail network. So the speeds that we're looking at are 300 to 350 kilometers per hour, and it would cut travel times in half between Toronto and Montreal. So we'll be looking at maybe 3 hours travel time. The project has been awarded to a project team, and it's something that, as far as full completion, we're probably looking at early 2040s. I'm not exactly sure, but these projects tend to take a while. That's right.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm glad to see there's a project that's underway. I think people have heard of that before, and I was glad you could give us a brief update on it.
Yes.
Last comment is, how are you all integrated with CUDA? We mentioned Marco D'Angelo and the Canadian Urban Transit Association. Tell us about the involvement of your organization with them and how you all interact.
CUDA is a wonderful organization. It's probably one of the first groups that we interacted with when we were starting out, with building our new program for transit and passenger rail. And we're deeply connected to CUDA. So we are members of the organization or the association. We attend all of their conferences, and we have a really good relationship with Marco and, others within the CUDA team. Within this particular project, what we're doing is making sure that CUDA membership has access to the latest information on our efforts, whether it's this project, whether it's other standards development projects. We want to provide them with information on standards that are under development, training programs that are available to them, and to help organizations leverage those tools that are available, and also to become involved in projects as they get started. So that's the relationship right now between us and CUDA. I also sit on their board, and I'm very pleased to participate in that way. I find it very rewarding. And yeah, CUDA is just a wonderful organization, very collaborative membership, and great to see the work that they're leading.
Yeah, I agree. I love CUDA. And, I'm good friends with a lot of the folks that are on the board, and Mike Bismeyer, who's chair of the business members group. And I go way back. He was on the podcast for a long time. So really happy that Transit Unplugged could be part of this part of your effort, which is, helping to promulgate the initial start and to grab interest of people to make sure they're engaged. Because this is an important process that'll end up having an impact on public transportation across Canada. So thank you so much, Ana-Maria Tomlinson, for sharing some time with us today to explain it all.
Thank you so much, Paul. It was really a pleasure to join you. Thank you for having me on the podcast, and really, really pleased to have this opportunity to share our work. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Transit Unplugged, the world's #1 transit executive podcast. I'm Julie Gates, executive producer of the podcast. Many thanks to the team that makes this show happen. Host and producer, Paul Comfort. Producer, Chris O'Keefe. Editor, Patrick Emile. Associate producer, Cindy Raskin. And consultants, Dan Meisner and Jonas Woost at Bumper. Transit Unplugged is being brought to you by Midaxo, passionate about moving the world's people. If you would enjoy behind-the-scenes insights and updates from the show, sign up for our weekly newsletter, which has links to can't-miss conversations with the biggest names in mobility. Head to transitunplugged.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Transit Unplugged.